Elizabeth Holmes took blood tests that did not work and used them on real patients. People were told they had cancer when they didn't. Others were told they were healthy when they were not. Doctors trusted the results. The US military trusted the company. Investors poured in billions. And the most shocking part? She knew the technology didn't work and did it anyway. She was called the next Steve Jobs, the youngest self-made female billionaire in history, the woman who claimed she would revolutionize medicine with just one drop of blood. Politicians trusted her. Generals trusted her. Fortune 500 CEOs trusted her. Even former US presidents stood behind her. And the world believed every word she said because she looked unstoppable. Black turtleneck, deep voice, unbreakable confidence, a perfect image of genius. But behind that image, behind the stage lights and the magazine covers, Elizabeth Holmes was hiding a secret that would destroy lives, shatter reputations, and burn billions of dollars into ash. Her company, Theranos, promised miracles, a small machine that could run hundreds of medical tests, faster, cheaper, and more accurate than anything the world had ever seen. It was a dream, too beautiful to question, so nobody questioned it. Not investors, not journalists, not doctors, not even the US military. But there was one problem. The dream wasn't real. The technology didn't work. It never worked, not even once. And yet billions kept flowing in. Partnerships were signed, patients were tested, and the world kept applauding, a miracle that did not exist. This is the story of how one woman built an empire on hope, protected it with lies, and watched it collapse. The moment the truth finally broke through. This is the dark deal behind the rise and fall of Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes didn't grow up wanting to be a doctor. She wanted something much bigger. She wanted to be a legend. From childhood, she studied the lives of her heroes, Steve Jobs, Thomas Edison, visionaries who changed the world and built empires along the way. And she learned one lesson early. In America, you don't need to change the world to be treated like you already did. You just need to look like someone who could. At Stanford, she didn't blend in. She stood out, obsessed, intense, relentless. She told professors she didn't want a degree. She wanted a revolution. When she was just 19, she dropped out of Stanford and pitched her idea, a small device that could run every blood test imaginable from a single finger prick. Doctors doubted her. Scientists doubted her. But investors, they didn't see a student. They saw the next Steve Jobs. Elizabeth lowered her voice. She wore the same black turtleneck every day. She crafted an image of brilliance so powerful that people ignored the missing details, like data, proof, or a functioning prototype. She didn't build a product. She built a persona, a myth, a story so captivating it made reality irrelevant. And the world was desperate to believe in the next genius founder. This was the moment Theranos was born, not in a lab, but in a boardroom, through confidence alone. Theranos didn't grow because the technology worked. It grew because Elizabeth worked the room better than anyone else in Silicon Valley. She spoke with absolute conviction, never blinking, never hesitating, never allowing doubt to exist in the same space as her voice. Investors weren't investing in a product. They were investing in her calm stare, her controlled tone, her promise that she would change healthcare forever. And she knew exactly which doors to knock on. Not tech companies, not hospitals, but politicians, military leaders, and billionaires who cared more about vision than evidence. Henry Kissinger joined her board. So did George Shultz, James Mattis, and other giants of American power. These men didn't understand medical technology, but they did understand influence. They believed her story, because believing her made them part of history. Meanwhile, employees inside Theranos started seeing things that didn't match the myth: broken machines, inconsistent results, tests that failed again and again. But Elizabeth had a rule. If you question the mission, you're the problem. Fear replaced honesty, silence replaced science, and a culture of worship replaced the need for proof. Theranos had become something more dangerous than a startup. It became a cult, with Elizabeth at the center, and truth locked somewhere far outside the building. The heart of Theranos was a machine called Edison, a small beige box with a touch screen, a needle, and a promise to change the world. Elizabeth said it could run over 200 medical tests from a single drop of blood, a miracle packed into a toaster-sized device. But inside the labs, engineers knew a secret no investor ever heard. Edison didn't work. Not sometimes, not occasionally, it never worked. Tests produced different results from the exact same sample. Machines overheated, cartridges jammed, blood leaked inside the chambers. One engineer called Edison a printer that bleeds. Another said, it breaks if you look at it too long. The team begged Elizabeth to slow down, to fix the machine, to invest in real research, but she refused. Her answer was always the same: make it work. No explanation, no guidance, just pressure. So the company took a darker path. They stopped using Edison and secretly switched to commercial analyzers made by Siemens. They diluted patient blood samples to fit the Siemens machines, even though dilution made the results dangerously inaccurate. And yet, Theranos kept promising the world a miracle device they knew couldn't pass a single real test. When Edison failed every internal test, Theranos didn't fix it, they hid it. Elizabeth created a system designed not to improve the technology, but to protect the illusion that the technology already worked. Employees were split into isolated teams that weren't allowed to talk to each other. Engineers were kept away from lab scientists were kept away from executives. If someone asked too many questions, their email access vanished. Their badge stopped working. Security would escort them out before they could warn anyone else. Meanwhile, Theranos hosted VIP tours. Senators, generals, CEOs, all shown a carefully staged demo that looked real, but was nothing more than a scripted performance. The machine wasn't running tests, it was running preloaded results. From a secret upstairs laboratory, behind the scenes, employees whispered about the truth. This is fraud. This is dangerous. This is going to hurt people. But Elizabeth dismissed all concerns. She said every startup had growing pains. She said critics were afraid of innovation. She said failure was impossible if we believe hard enough. And for a while, the illusion worked. Investors kept pouring in money. Media called Theranos the future of medicine. But illusions don't scale. And the bigger Theranos became, the more lies it needed to survive. As Theranos gained power, the stakes skyrocketed. This wasn't a tech gimmick anymore. This was healthcare. And mistakes here don't cost money, they cost lives. In 2013, Theranos launched its first real-world partnership with Walgreens, one of the biggest pharmacy chains in America. Overnight, thousands of patients began taking Theranos blood tests, trusting the results, trusting the brand, trusting the miracle they had been sold. But inside the labs, the machines were still failing. Tests still broke down, results still changed every time a sample was run. Patients were told they had cancer when they didn't, told they were pregnant when they weren't, told they were healthy when they desperately needed treatment. One woman received a result suggesting she was experiencing a miscarriage. Terrified, she rushed to the hospital, only to find out that Theranos was wrong. A man was told that his testosterone was nearly zero, a diagnosis that could indicate severe illness. But the number came from a machine that barely worked. Doctors grew suspicious. They asked for data, for validation, for anything that could prove Theranos was legitimate. But when physicians demanded answers, Theranos responded with threats, letters from lawyers, accusations, silence where transparency should have been. And yet, the company kept expanding. More patients, more tests, more lives, placed in the hands of a machine that couldn't do what it promised. By 2014, Theranos was no longer a startup. It was a fortress, a place where secrecy ruled, and fear was the only language spoken openly. Every employee signed strict NDAs, not the standard kind, but contracts written like military orders with consequences that could ruin a career before it even began. Security badges tracked every movement. Doors required multiple authorizations. Employees were followed, monitored, watched. Conversations in hallways stopped the moment someone walked by. Whispers replaced teamwork. Silence replaced trust. Elizabeth and her second-in-command, Sunny Balwani, ran the company like commanders, not executives. Any pushback meant you were not loyal. And in Theranos, disloyalty meant exile. People who questioned results found themselves reassigned, isolated, or suddenly fired, with legal threats waiting outside the door. One engineer described the office as a pressure chamber, where everyone pretended everything worked, even though nothing did. Another said, Theranos didn't test blood. Theranos tested obedience. Fear became a strategy. If people were too scared to speak, no one would reveal the truth. And as long as the truth stayed buried, the company could keep growing. But fear is a brittle foundation. And in the shadows of Theranos, pressure was building far beyond the breaking point. In a company built on fear and silence, it seemed impossible that anyone would ever speak out. But then, one young employee reached his breaking point. His name was Tyler Schultz, the grandson of George Shultz, a legendary U.S. statesman and a member of Theranos' powerful board. Tyler joined Theranos believing he was helping change the world. But inside the labs, he saw the truth unfold in front of him. Failed tests, fake demos, patients at risk. When he raised concerns internally, Theranos didn't investigate the problems. They investigated him. His emails were monitored, his movements tracked. Security followed him through the building. The company he trusted treated him like an enemy. Sunny Balwani confronted him directly, saying Tyler didn't understand the mission and demanding he stay silent for the good of the company. But Tyler refused. He believed the truth mattered more than the myth Theranos had built. He reached out to regulators, then to journalists, and finally to one man whose reporting would redefine the entire story, John Carreyrou from the Wall Street Journal. The moment Tyler talked, the countdown began. Theranos felt the threat instantly. Elizabeth unleashed her lawyers, including the powerful firm led by David Boies, a legal pit bull notorious for intimidation. Tyler wasn't just risking his career, he was risking his family. His grandfather, a board member worth millions, refused to believe him. But Tyler kept going. One voice against a billion-dollar empire. One truth against a mountain of lies. And for the first time, the walls of Theranos began to crack. When John Carreyrou received the first tip, he didn't know the scale of the story, only that something felt wrong. Very wrong. Theranos was valued at $9 billion, praised by every major newspaper, and celebrated as the crown jewel of Silicon Valley innovation. Yet behind that sparkling image stood whispers of broken machines, terrified employees, and patients harmed by false results. Carreyrou started making calls. He spoke to engineers, lab workers, doctors, anyone who had seen the inside of Theranos. And what he heard was always the same. The technology doesn't work. It never worked. Someone has to stop this. But as the reporting grew, Theranos grew hostile. Elizabeth sent her lawyers to threaten former employees, block information, and scare people into silence. Investigators were followed. Sources were confronted. Families were pressured. Theranos treated journalism like an act of war. Elizabeth believed she could outrun the truth, just as she had outrun every question before. But the more she resisted, the more people talked. A dam had burst, and the flow of information was too strong to stop. Carreyrou prepared his article, a story that would shake the entire tech world, drag Theranos into the light, and mark the beginning of the end. On October 15, 2015, the Wall Street Journal published the article that Elizabeth Holmes feared most. The headline didn't scream, it didn't accuse, it didn't sensationalize. It simply said the quiet part out loud. Theranos' technology doesn't work. The story revealed everything. The broken machines, the diluted blood samples, the fake demos, the secrecy, the fear, the deception. Overnight, the world changed. Investors panicked. Doctors demanded answers. Walgreens froze its partnership. Patients questioned their results. Theranos issued a denial, a statement carefully crafted to sound confident, even as the walls were collapsing. Elizabeth went on television, smiling calmly, telling America that the article was false, misleading, written by someone who didn't understand innovation. But this time, the world didn't believe her. More sources spoke to journalists. More evidence came to light. Federal regulators opened investigations. The cracks in Theranos widened until the whole facade began to tear apart. What had once been a miracle was now a scandal. A billion-dollar empire built not on technology, but on charisma and fear. And for the first time, Elizabeth Holmes faced something she couldn't charm, intimidate, or control: the truth. After the Wall Street Journal story broke, the world didn't just react, it mobilized. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the agency responsible for regulating laboratories in the U.S., launched a full investigation into Theranos. Inspectors walked into the company's labs expecting cutting-edge technology, innovation, the future of medicine. Instead, they found broken machines, untrained staff, unvalidated tests, and a chaotic system that violated nearly every rule in modern laboratory science. Some devices were running on software not approved for clinical use. Others were held together with tape, foil, and improvised fixes that looked more like a school science fair than a billion-dollar company. One inspector wrote, "This does not resemble a functioning clinical laboratory." The findings were devastating. The agency threatened to shut down Theranos' main lab entirely, to revoke the company's license, and to ban Elizabeth Holmes from running any medical facility for 2 years. For the first time, the consequences were real, not rumors, not whispers, not speculation. Official, federal consequences. Investors demanded emergency meetings. Board members panicked. Partners backed out. The empire Elizabeth built on confidence was collapsing under the weight of cold, verifiable facts. Theranos tried to negotiate, stall, deny, delay. But the investigators had seen too much. There was no explaining this away. The fall had begun, and nothing could stop what was coming next. As regulators closed in and the truth became impossible to ignore, something unexpected happened inside Theranos. People began to wake up. For years, employees believed in Elizabeth. They believed in her mission, her confidence, her promise to change healthcare forever. Many of them weren't just workers, they were true believers, people who sacrificed sleep, time, relationships, all for the dream that now lay shattered at their feet. Some had defended Theranos publicly, risking their reputations to protect a technology that never worked. Others had silenced their own doubts because they trusted Elizabeth more than their own eyes. And now, as the investigations unfolded, emails leaked, documents surfaced, and whistleblowers spoke out. The myth they worshipped began to crumble. Employees whispered in hallways again, not out of fear, but out of realization. What have we been doing? How did this go so far? Were we helping people or hurting them? Some cried at their desks, others resigned quietly. A few confronted leadership directly, demanding answers that no one could give. Even board members, powerful men who once praised Elizabeth as a genius, realized they had been manipulated, charmed, used. The emotional collapse inside Theranos was more devastating than the financial one outside, because money can be replaced, reputations can recover, but trust, once broken, never comes back. And inside Theranos, trust was gone. In 2016, after months of investigations, the US government finally stepped in, not as an observer, but as a prosecutor. Federal regulators issued a ruling that shook the medical world. Theranos had put patients in danger, violated laboratory laws, and operated with critical deficiencies. Elizabeth Holmes was banned from owning or operating any medical laboratory for 2 years. It was the first real crack in her carefully constructed armor, and once it appeared, the rest began to collapse. Walgreens terminated its partnership and sued Theranos for $140 million. Investors demanded refunds. Board members resigned. The company laid off hundreds of employees. And then, in 2018, came the final blow. The U.S. Department of Justice charged Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani with massive fraud, 11 felony counts, wire fraud, conspiracy, a scheme that spanned years and deceived investors, doctors, and thousands of patients. According to the indictment, Elizabeth Holmes didn't just mislead people, she intentionally crafted a system designed to deceive. The woman once called a genius, a visionary, a world changer, was now facing up to 20 years in prison. For the first time in her life, her voice, her confidence, her charisma, none of it could save her. The truth had arrived, and it came with handcuffs. In 2021, after years of investigations, lawsuits, and national headlines, Elizabeth Holmes finally walked into a courtroom, not as a CEO, but as a defendant. She arrived holding the hand of her partner, pregnant with her first child, wearing the same calm expression that once convinced the world she could change it. But this time, there were no applause, no magazine covers, no billionaires cheering her on. Only journalists, prosecutors, and families of patients who trusted Theranos and paid the price. The trial revealed everything in painful detail. Emails, texts, internal documents, testimony from former employees, scientists, and victims. Jurors watched videos of Elizabeth promising miracles, even while engineers begged her to stop the rollout because the machines were failing. They heard how she blamed others, how she denied responsibility, how she claimed she believed the technology worked even when evidence showed she knew it didn't. Prosecutors argued that Theranos wasn't just a failed startup, it was a calculated deception, a theater of innovation built to manipulate investors and silence anyone who tried to uncover the truth. And for the first time, Elizabeth couldn't control the narrative. She couldn't charm the jury. She couldn't intimidate the witnesses. She couldn't hide behind her black turtleneck. After months of testimony, the verdict finally came, guilty on multiple counts of fraud. Elizabeth Holmes, once the youngest self-made billionaire in America, was now facing years behind bars. As she sat in the courtroom, listening to the judge, her eyes didn't show anger, only something colder, a quiet realization that the world she built on confidence had vanished forever. The rise was extraordinary, the fall was catastrophic, and justice had finally arrived. In 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to over 11 years in federal prison. The woman who once stood on magazine covers as the future of medicine now stood before a judge, crying, saying she never meant to hurt anyone. But intentions don't erase consequences, and Theranos left a long trail of them. Patients misdiagnosed, careers destroyed, billions burned, trust shattered. Elizabeth Holmes didn't fail because she dreamed too big. She failed because she believed the dream was more important than the truth. Theranos wasn't a story about innovation. It was a story about illusion, a seductive lie wrapped in the language of progress. The world didn't fall for the technology. It fell for the confidence, for the black turtleneck, for the myth of the genius founder who could change everything with a single idea. But in the end, reality doesn't negotiate. Machines have to work. Tests have to be accurate. And truth, no matter how deeply you bury it, always finds a way back to the surface. Theranos rose fast. It fell faster. And what's left behind is a warning carved into history. A beautiful lie can move mountains, but it can't stand forever. This was the real story behind the rise and fall of Theranos. And somewhere in the silence after the verdict, one truth remained clear. In a world obsessed with innovation, nothing is more revolutionary than honesty.